Hi there, Michael Palladini, aka MacGyver, to all my YouTube friends. We're back on this now. We're going to start tearing it down and getting some parts. One thing I might mention here in that when we were working on the brakes in the last video, the calipers were hung up really good. One good indication that you have a wonky caliper that's locking up is that when it cools down, it releases. So what happens is the plastic pistons inside the calipers, they expand and swell up and get porous with time, and once they soak up that brake fluid and everything expands, those pistons jam in the bore and they don't release when you take the foot off the pedal. So what we're going to do now, we're going to start tearing this thing down. We need to see if we can machine these rotors and drums if they're within spec. If not, then we're going to have to replace them. And that's where we're going from here. Okay, when we go to pull our brake caliper off, we don't obviously want all our brake fluid to leak out. So what we're going to use is a brake line clamp, a little damn about like a, you can get them from tool trucks, that's where I got mine, or some of your better auto parts stores that carry some tools will carry these. And what this does basically is this just pinches that brake line just enough to keep your brake fluid from draining out, and that way you can pop the brake line off and then you lose just a little tiny bit in there, and makes bleeding a whole lot easier when you're going back together with the new caliper. So, and what we'll do when we put the new caliper and all back on is we'll release this, open the bleeder, and let it do what's called a gravity bleed, where fluid will just naturally fill the caliper up, and when you start getting fluid coming out of the bleeder, open bleeder valve, then you close it, and then when you go to pump the pedal and bleed it, you only get maybe a little of air, and instead of having to take 30 minutes to bleed the whole system out. So just a little interesting tidbit. Okay, so I had the caliper off, and if I can illustrate this properly or not, but what we have here is, this is what's called a dual piston caliper, and each one of these pistons are made of plastic, and you should be able to relatively easily compress those pistons back in, and they're very, very, very stiff, very difficult to squeeze back in there, which is another smoking gun, if you will. And so we're gonna take these back with us, since most of your calipers and such that you buy will be remanufactured or rebuilt. I go ahead and take them off and take them with me, so I don't have to pay the core. And a helpful mechanics tip is, since they tend to be messy and ooky and they've got brake fluid all over them, an old drawer from an abandoned refrigerator makes a very nice bin to carry them in. You just set it in your trunk, and those of you who know me, I have one of my cars is a BMW 7 Series, so not the prettiest thing in the world. She's an old girl, but still, I'm not going to trash it out wantonly, so put it in there and you can just lay it in there in the trunk and you're all good. Now, this is a brake pad, and you can see how little brake material is left on that pad. So at the very best, this would have been just time for a brake job anyway for him. So we won't need that. And I doubt seriously that the Don't need these either. I think they come with the new, already glued onto the new pads. But you can see how the glue got cooked in there from the heat, massive amounts of heat that built up from that brake dragging. So pretty much how a brake system works. Turns kinetic energy, which is motion, into heat energy through friction. So friction grabs the rotor, that slows the car down, and the byproduct of that is heat, because you don't destroy energy, you have to change it. So it changes kinetic energy into heat energy through friction. So there you go, there's your scientific lesson for the day. It can be like Bill Nye the Science Guy or something like that. There's the other one, burnt bits falling off of it. And there's the thing there, just about ready to get on the little squeal thing. So we won't need that. Okay, so we're back from the parts house, and unfortunately we weren't able to save the rotors or the drums. The rotors on this truck, and I feel kind of silly, I should have known and remembered this, but as is the case with many of your newer vehicles now, you can't turn the brake rotors. They won't give you a specification as far as a minimum safe thickness, so if you happen to gall one up, or in this case they warp from the heat, they can't be turned, they have to be replaced. And part of the reason for that is the manufacturers are trying to meet fuel efficiency standards, so they're trimming weight everywhere they can. And frankly, a disc brake rotor is a very heavy item, so they make it as minimal as possible to still be safe. The downside of it is that when it's gets damaged, it has to be replaced. It can't be turned or saved. So we're into two new rotors, and the brake drums themselves were very warped, and I'd noticed a little pulsation coming from the back. Felt like it was hopping a little bit in the back, now the brake drums could have possibly been turned had they not been warped so bad. If they turned all the warp out of them and got them straight and got all the grooves out of them, then they would have been too thin, so they wouldn't turn them. So I had to replace those. And of course there's the brake shoes, new brake shoes, and the brake pads. As I was telling you before, looking at the brake pad that came off the truck, you can see that the new pad has a considerably larger amount of material on it. And there's our two replacement calipers, and we had to turn the old ones in for a core. This is the gear oil. To replace the gear oil, we're going to have to drain out of the rear end, because once we pull that back cover off, all of the gear oil will come out. And these are the replacement for the axle seals. Now what I do, as I mentioned in the previous video, what happens is the axle itself is the inner race of the wheel bearing. So what this is a more substantial, beefier setup for the axle bearing and seal assembly, and will prevent any further leaks. if you were to just put a new seal in there, it would leak again, because as the bearing and the axle wear, it actually wears a slight groove into the axle, which allows the axle to move up and down, sideways, and of course that's not going to seal very well. So, and you'll see more about that once I actually start tearing it apart. And the other thing I went ahead and bought is 2 new grease cups for the front brake rotors. What had happened is, I guess whoever worked on this thing in the past, when they went to pop the grease caps off, got a little ham-fisted with it, I guess, and literally poked a hole in the grease cap. And which, you know, is not terrible, but you know, in this case, when the disc brake rotor heated up and cooked the grease, and the grease thinned out and it came out and it leaked everywhere. Now, whoever did this before had tried to seal that leak up with silicone, but it didn't work. So anyway, so we have all that. Those are all our parts. And of course the gasket, which is for the new cover, or the, you know, once we pull that round cover there off the back of the rear end, all the gear oil drains out, and that's where we'll pull the clips out to release the axles, and these axles will slide out. And see if you can feel any free play in there. Not terrible, but once we slide that axle out, you'll see what's going on. So stay tuned, and we will see you in the next part of the series here as we put the front end back together, clean and repack all the wheel bearings, and put new rotors on, and hang the new hydraulics on the front. And then we'll move to the back and start breaking all that down. So, till next time.